Welcome back to Six Sad Lit. I'm your host, Jen Eastwood, and today I'm joined by the extraordinary Torrey Peters, the author of Detransition Baby and Stag Dance. Torrey's debut novel, Detransition Baby, was a phenomenon, winner of the Penn Hemingway Award, named one of the New York Times best books of the century, and a defining work of contemporary queer fiction. Her follow-up, Stag Dance, continues to expand her universe, a sharp, sensual, and deeply human exploration of transformation, desire, and freedom. In this episode, Tori and I talk about the strange realities of touring as a writer, the art and exhaustion of book marketing, and how the creative process changes in response to cultural and political shifts. We get into identity, belonging, and the evolution of modern storytelling, and what it means to make art that's both deeply personal and radically political. This is a very candid and open conversation about the realities of writing through the chaos and collapse of the world around us right now, staying true to yourself in an industry that often rewards performance, and finding power in work that refuses to play by the rules. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Torrey Peters. How are you feeling after such a huge year?
The tour was really like from March till the end of May, and then there was like a couple of like stops in, I guess, Edinburgh and like some little places around, like not that little, but like Pittsburgh, just like little jaunts. And I think it was really that it was like a kind of pent up interest since Detransition Baby came out during the pandemic. I didn't tour. And you know, people had a lot of questions about the situations in that book. And so so I was sort of like touring on two books at once, I think was why it ended up being so big. For, like not being a giant, John Le Carre novel or something like that, it was, but, yeah, I'm tired. And I'm like, more familiar, I think, and maybe a little bit more like disillusioned a little bit with like the way that the kind of like marketing and like movement of like uh writers around the world kind of happened. So that like, I mean, number one, you get really sick of you get really sick of yourself talking, but number two, you kind of get a sense that like the way, I mean, I'm very grateful for every festival that invited me, but you're like, you get a sense of like, how artists are paid, writers are picked, how there's sort of like certain books or themes that end up circulating, and like, every single festival director of one festival goes to all the other festivals. So they see like, oh, this festival says that this writer is important this year. And then, that writer gets invited, kind of like this, it's kind of like a social world of like, festivals, people going to each other's festivals and being like, who do you think is important? And, a lot of that's arbitrary. The question of like who gets to break in and how and what kind of things it is. And I should have a caveat to say that like, I was invited to Auckland, where I met you. And, those festivals were great. They're like, I'm not trying to talk shit about it, but I think just like the very nature of how various writers get picked and literally like shuffled around the world, in a given year. And then, the next year they might not be chosen, or, and sort of like the work that you do to become a writer who's on an international stage, it's a specific thing, it's not the same as, it's totally not the same as being a writer in your bedroom or wherever it is that you write. Trying to come up with a weird story or a fun story or something thrilling. It's just entirely different work. And in some ways it's like opposite to the work that you would do when you're alone with your computer or notepad or whatever. And that's like it's a bit disorienting. So it's like, It's like the time that you spend touring is actually time that you spend away from being a writer, despite the fact that you're talking about it all the time. And you almost have to like recover your brain, the part of you that talks about marketing and like no, not doesn't talk about marketing, but knows what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to perform and how you're supposed to sell books, which is really the ultimate purpose of touring, is a really different writer than the one who's going to like come up with something uh, unexpected.
It's interesting you say that because I've got a little gripe with book marketing is when a new release, particularly in like any book to do with dark academia or with dark academia vibes, if a book is marketed as being, it's like The Secret History meets X.
Yeah.
And I feel like instantly that book to me is set up to fail because my first impression or like my expectation is now this book is going to be like The Secret History, which is one of the greatest books ever. Like that was like nobody can write The Secret History.
Yeah.
Like it's a masterpiece, and I just can't imagine like the pressure if you're a debut writer and you've written this thing and maybe in your head like you were drawing on inspiration from The Secret History, but now people are like calling it The Secret History but XYZ.
Yeah.
And it just feels like a really weird marketing choice to me where immediately I'm not going to like it because if now I'm constantly comparing it to The Secret History.
Yeah, but that's
which
because
feels unfair.
you're approaching it as a reader, you know?
Yeah.
And like this is like how like the marketing side of this ruins your brain is you start to understand why things are the way they are. And so like when you sell a book, right? You're selling the book. They don't know what, like, publishers have no idea what's going to sell and what's not going to sell. And so the whole way that an editor set decides what they're going to pay you is what's called comps, like books that are similar to your book. And then they say, how did that book do? And then they say, well, that book sold 100,000 copies or whatever. So we're going to say that this book is going to sell 100,000 copies and we're going to give an advance based on like 2 or 3 comps that we think are reasonable to this book. That if we pull this off, the book will sell like that. And sometimes the comps are low comps. So like we actually think this book is like a book that sold 200 copies, right? So your job as a writer, if you want to get money, is to say my book's like The Secret History, because by saying it's like The Secret History, they're literally going to pay you more because you're putting yourself in that category. I mean, this was like something that was like fundamental to like Detransition Baby, was that, you know, that was a book about trans women, but I didn't say this is a trans book for queers because that's a small market and compared to queer books. I said, this is a trans iteration of the Woman in the City story. This is Mary McCarthy's The Group. This is, I don't remember what everything I said, you know, this is Fleabag in book form with trans. This is all these different things. And the reason you say that is because if someone's like, well, what are we going to pay you? And they're like, we could pay you for, you know, some book that we never heard of, or we could pay you for Mary McCarthy's The Group, which sold 2 million copies. You want to say it's a group. And so like the whole time that you're actually on tour, like it's unfair that you have to like to do that, you know, and then your readers are like, this isn't at all like that. What you said, it's like, but you can't really drop that facade, right? Because if you drop the facade and you say, you're right, it's nothing like The Secret History, then next time that you try and say with your next book, it's just like The Secret History, people are like, we heard you say it's not like The Secret History. We're going to give you a fifth of what we paid you last time. And so like this is what I mean, like the brain that you get when you are dealing with this kind of thing. And so you want to be truthful to your readers. You don't want to say like, listen, you know, I know it's not like The Secret History, but I can't say it's like The Secret History. And so actually what I've done is I developed this whole routine in which I acknowledge out of one side of my mouth that it's not like The Secret History. And on the other side of it, I say my book's just like The Secret History. And it's this like persona, it's this way of speaking that is like endemic to, I think, the book industry based on the various pressures that everybody has in it, whether that be like the marketing team, the authors themselves, you know, the publicists, whatever it is, like everybody's invested in various narratives. And I think when you do that so much, like the question of like, is this book a great book, or am I being honest with my readers, can disappear. And that's like the worst. And the thing is, like, you can know that you have the game. You can know this game. Like, I think the game is actually really important, especially if you're like a writer who who isn't from a group that is normally gets big book contracts, right? So if you come from some marginalized group and you say, my book's like this other book that is you've never heard of, you'll never get a book contract. And so you have to play it, especially if you're like trying to get in on it. But it doesn't feel great. And it's like the warping effects of it accrete the longer you do it.
What were your comps for Stag Dance? Did you have to
What did I
query
do? I
it?
think I said, yeah. Well, you have to just like, I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're, so my recommendation to writers is to take as much control of this as you can, because if you don't come up with comps, your editor, whoever is selling your book, who's a little bit on your side, but ultimately works for the publisher, is going to come up with comps. And so you want to find the comps that do you justice artistically, but also get you a paycheck. Sorry to be like so fucking cynical and plain about it, but like this is why people go on tour, is like to sell
Yeah.
books and to like get back their thing. And it is also to meet readers and all that, see the world, etc. But my comps were, I think it was Jennifer Egan, in that it's like kaleidoscopic, and George Saunders, in that they're like weird stories about like this, sort of like surprising. I think I was like, and I also was sort of like the idea of like me as like a trans woman comparing myself not to like, I don't know, storied people of whenever, but to be like, yeah, George Saunders, that guy. The like guy who talks in a dad voice. That's so yeah, and but if I didn't, I think people would have been. That was like a comp. The George Saunders was like a comp that I came up with, which I think other people would have been nervous to comp my books to George Saunders. They would think like, oh, I have to compare you to some queer, some whomever. And to me, it was like, no, I want to play this game the same way that the big authors are playing this game. Like I'm not that side of it is about getting what you can so that you can write on your own time, which is super. Like I hear that out of my mouth, and I'm like, that sounds so cynical. But it's just it's that's the commerce side.
I don't, I mean, cynical, yes, but like I've spoken to other authors on this podcast and we all understand we live under capitalism. And
Yeah,
if life was great and capitalism didn't exist, we'd be able to write and make whatever art we wanted to and be free to express ourselves and be fulfilled doing that. But like that's unfortunately just not the
yeah.
world that we live in. And so there's no prizes for being a suffering
Yeah.
artist.
Well, I think that like, for me, part of it is like is a strategy of compartmentalizing it. Like so this is like when you say how was that tour? Like tour is the part of me, like I have a way of doing things where like that's when I'm thinking about the commerce side of it. And if I can do it all right in that specific period of time, then hopefully I can come back, like sort of lose it over a couple months, go do whatever it is that I want to do. And then when I like sit down to write again, I'm not that brain is dissolved, and like building it when you need it and dissolving it when you don't need it. I think is like one of the skills of being a modern writer, or making a career out of it, I should say.
Does touring dampen your passion for writing?
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
yeah, I
Sorry to
can
be so
imagine.
like blunt about
No,
it. It's
I
like,
can see that.
but
It
it's like,
sounds exhausting.
you meet all these other writers. There's like, you have a sense, like, when you go and you sign books after after any event, you're signing it with like six other authors at any festival, and you see how many, uh, how many people have come out for you versus how many people, and it's not a competition, but like you can't help but notice it. You can't help to notice these things. And then you think like, oh, like I sat next to, this is, not to like name authors, but I sat next to like, there was a romantasy, author. I write nothing like romantasy,
No.
but there was a romantasy author, um, who was next to me. And I had like a pretty good size, number of people waiting to have my books, to have me sign the book. And I felt pretty good about it. And then this romantasy author sat down next to me, and the line was like around the block, and no matter how it is, if you're like, this is the number of people like what I do, but maybe if I was writing romantasy, I should, I would have fans lining up, halfway across the country. And then you sit down to write, and you're like, maybe I'll throw in a few romantasy elements this time, because you've seen it. You're in that mindset. You see it, that's what you want. And that kind of thing warps you. So like basically when I'm in order to not be warped by a lot of the things that you see when you're on tour, I just am sort of like, this isn't the time for like artistic considerations, because if it was the time for artistic considerations and really, really like opening myself, I mean, I try to stay not like totally closed, but like, if I was really, really open, I'd be writing romantasy right now, because I'd be like, that's what people love.
It's what works. Yeah. So I'm currently reading Detransition Baby at the moment, finally, and I'm halfway through, and I am enjoying it so much, and it's so fascinating I'm really glad actually that I got to see you speak at the festival earlier this year and hear about your perspective and some of the context behind when you were writing it, and especially having read it after Stag Dance. I read Stag Dance first, which I just loved, because I love weird shit. Like I love it. And like the lumberjack story to me is like perfection. I just love it. It's so interesting. Detransition Baby could not be more different, which I think is super brave, honestly. The fact that that was your debut and it was so successful, and then to take the risk of releasing
writing in lumberjack dialect. I mean,
that's the kind of
thing that's the kind of decision you don't make right after you get back from tour. You don't go back and go, what everyone wants is for me to write an entire novel in lumberjack dialect.
It was so fun.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I had a great time in the end, but it's like, you have to kind of like go be alone and like with your own quirks and your own like, obsessions and stuff, and not, what you've seen from all these other people before, and what you've heard. You hear so many people be like, this is what I like about your work, or this is what is good about your work, and this is annoying to me about your work. You hear that so much. You have to get that out of your head before you're like, lumberjack is the way to do it.
I'll be completely honest that like as I'm reading Detransition Baby, and as a queer person myself, like I love it so much. There was one scene I just read where Amy and Patrick are in the glamour boutique together, and then the mother and the daughter accidentally walk in, and all of a sudden like this illusion of it being a safe place just for them is shattered. And that really reminded me of, there's a queer bar, a gay bar here in Auckland that when I was a young baby gay, like was very much just this safe haven. It was the only place for us. And then it got fucking co-opted by all these straights who started thinking it was cool to come and hang out at the gay bar, and like that just destroyed it. Like and now it's basically like a bar for straight people who want to go and like feel like they're having a wild night out, and it's like we can't even have this one safe space. So like obviously, even though it's written from trans perspective, there are a lot of scenes throughout that I'm like, I relate to that as like, I don't know, longing for a sense of identity and belonging. And then also Katrina, because I'm also Chinese mixed race and look mostly white and feel disconnected. So what really struck me about Detransition Baby in particular was your insights into different groups, different people, and that longing to belong is so like spot on. Like, you just really so emotionally charged, and I love how you draw comparisons to, I don't know, I can constantly see how all of our experiences, we're experiencing similar feelings of like wanting to belong and like struggling with our identity. But what I was going to say is what really, really surprised me is, given all of these themes, how wildly successful Detransition Baby has been in the mainstream. Like, to me, that would not strike me as something that the world at large would be ready to receive. Did that surprise you when it came out?
I mean, for reasons of modesty, I have to say yes, but
You can be honest,
no,
please.
I
Like,
mean,
it's
the
an
thing is,
excellent novel.
when you read a lot of great books, they're fucking weird. I just read A Place of Greater Safety by Hilary Mantel, right? Who, won the Booker twice. A Place of Greater Safety was her first big historical book in which she sort of, about the French Revolution, in which she sort of like honed the techniques that later led to like Wolf Hall, which won the Booker, and then, Bring Up the Bodies. It's a weird ass book. It's like every technique you could possibly do is in there, but all of it's like honed through like her kind of strange sensibility. The tenses kind of don't work, but they do in like a emotive, associative way. It's like, it's just, I mean, it's really genius. It's almost like she was like channeling ghosts or something, but you're like, is this, and it's 900 pages. And you're like, is 900 pages of like every single writing technique possible about the French Revolution going to make like a gripping book? And it does, even something like, I've been on the reading these long, weird books, but I read Middlemarch. And I was, I started opening it up and I was like, oh, Middlemarch, this like, uh, I feel I should read this before I die, and I will, And then you read Middlemarch and it's like, it's weird, like you have there's a narrator in Middlemarch, unclear who the narrator is, but occasionally will sometimes be like, you should be reciting, what's happening with the characters, and then be like, and this made me think about the venerable Roman, and then we'll just give like a weird disquisition on like some like Roman person, and then go back to the story, and like it's like, this is a strange book, and like most of the books that I think that like are really great are the ones that are kind of, or that are held up as like, wow, look at this, even in like the most like mainstream canonical way, are books that are very, very particular, and Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. It's like, why that you're like, this is a classic of like, American literature. And it's like, it's about race, it's all this stuff. And like, it starts out with a fight and it ends up with him sitting in a basement with a bunch of light bulbs. And like, you're like, what the fuck is this book? And it's like, well, this is the book that tells us all about, race in America. And it's like, it's just weird. And I think that that's like, generally, you find people like the particular, and the particular sort of like, when you go through that wormhole, the particular, and it spreads out to this sort of universal kind of thing. So that if I'm writing about yearning as a trans woman for someone to love, and to care for, and I talk about sort of like the way that I deal with like young trans women who look up to me, and I couch it in the terms of motherhood, that this is actually like extremely easy for other people who are facing motherhood to understand. Where people are like, I'm surprised that this book did well. I'm kind of like, I feel like that's people seeing what it sounds like rather than what it is, and also what really connects with people in books that like, that people are like, this is the book that I might read 10 years later. They're not the books that are standard. They are the books that are weird. And most books that I return to are just inevitably themselves. If books were, I don't know if themselves is the right word for books, but sometimes books are so alive that you have to really call them like themselves.
So I have ADHD and
Mhm.
I have special interests, like a
Yeah.
special interest will drop. And my latest special interest has been classic horror. And
Hmm.
but reading it I really love horror.
Yeah.
I always have, and I really enjoy campy, like really campy teen horror and also really excellent gothic horror. But I've always just enjoyed it as a consumer. Like I just enjoy it as a reader and for the entertaining side of it. But I started taking an interest in the actual craft of horror because a while ago I bought this anthology from Penguin called Weird Fiction, which I'm like, oh, an anthology called Weird Fiction? Like,
Yeah.
hello, that's exactly me. And the first story was the Red Mask. Is that what it's called? The Red Mask of Death or something by Edgar Allan Poe. And it's
Hmm.
a really short story. And it was so striking. I was like, because I've read Edgar Allan Poe before, but like not for a long time, and never through the lens of like actually examining the craft.
Yeah.
And it just like blew my mind. It's what ushered in my current
Hmm.
special interest. And so I realized how hard it is and how unusual it is and uncommon it is for contemporary horror, not just in fiction, but also in film and television, to straddle that line of suspense and dread and without tipping into just gratuitous violence. And
Hmm.
so what I realized as I was reading each of these stories, God, they're so good. Like really reading them and absorbing them, and then afterwards going and like reading more about them and studying them. The narrators are
Yeah.
very, very odd, and if obvious at all. So like in The Mask of Red Death, we don't even know who the narrator is. That's my
Hmm.
biggest question. I'm like, why are people not talking about this? There's a narrator who is there, but everybody's dead. Who the fuck is the narrator? Like, who is the narrator? It's so chilling, and like that open-ended question alone, I'm like, that is scary. Like that leaves me with like this feeling of like unease. It's like we don't know who that is, and that question's never answered. And then even the rest of them, like another one was Monkey's Paw, and which is another classic story, and so terrifying. And the narrators like are so deeply human and flawed, and these stories are weird, and they make these decisions that just don't make sense. And it's been like it's no question as to why these are classic horror and
Yeah.
enduring horror stories, and the difference between them and like uh, I'd say almost like the hamster wheel of horror that gets pumped out now, sort of like romance. Like it's fine, like
Hmm.
like it's fun,
Yeah.
it's an easy read, but like what separates like an enduring classic piece of horror literature from one of like a almost like a top 40s poppy kind of contemporary horror. And so yeah, that's sort of what
Yeah. I mean, it's
you made me think of.
what you're talking about, like what I think you're talking about for me is the mode of the fantastic, and that like in a specific literary term, which is the fantastic is like a moment of hesitation between like the uncanny, where it's like this is like the rules of the world have been suspended. Like there are vampires, there are sort of things. And um hesitating between the uncanny and reason, where you're like, oh, I thought it was a vampire, but actually it was a guy with, a murderer with long teeth, right? Where you can understand it. But like that moment where you actually like cannot say, like the second it resolves, then suddenly like something is missing. Like, if it resolves into, oh yeah, it's supernatural, we live in a world of vampires, then you're like, oh wow, that's crazy. But it. And the other one being like, if it resolves into like, oh no, actually that's not a vampire. It's actually just, a bad guy who likes to bite people or whatever. And we understand that, who's deluded into think he's a vampire. I feel that actually like to hit that moment of fantastic hesitation, which is something that like Poe does really well, and a lot of like older horror is written in the fantastic mode, which is something you rarely see these days, is the fantastic mode. And I think you rarely see it because it to get because we're all used to these stories, to hit the fantastic mode, to hit the moment where like a reader's like, I actually don't know if it's real or not. I don't know the laws of the universe might be suspended. They might not. Like, you have to write something so strange to get there. You have to do things like what you just described, like just absent any identity from the narrator in a way that's like, what is going on? And what happens now is people are like, you know, we're looking to sell this book. And this goes back to the idea of comps at the beginning. It's like, we're looking to sell this book. We know that like, if you're writing a romance, the beats are, and it's like 9 beats that every story has to hit in a certain thing. If you're doing a mystery, it's like, first you see the dead body, then you meet the detective, then the detective has 3 different people and each one has a plausible thing, and then there's a false answer to your murder, like we think it's this person, but then some hidden knowledge from the first act returns and that solves you, and you get the satisfying twist in the mystery. And it's like, and actually, uh, every show, every detective show works basically on that same formula. And it's the old Agatha Christie formula. And it's great, but you always know it's coming because you have the formula, because you're like, I saw the formula. Whereas like, when some of the like weirder detective-y stories are the ones where it's like, it's not exactly a detective, there's not exactly suspects, I don't really know what's going on, and the form is broken, and I just feel like really at sea in a way that's exciting in those kinds of works. Yeah, so I totally know what you're talking about with horror. I'm talking about like detective and other things, because I don't actually read. I read some. I read a fair amount of classic horror, but I don't read modern horror at all.
I want to love it so bad, but honestly, I would say that I do think Mariana Enriquez is like a modern classic.
Yeah,
Like, her short stories are the and I already love her work, but as I've been really closely paying attention to this classic horror and the techniques that they use, the more I've come to appreciate how skilled she is and how unique her work is. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with campy horror and, like, writing a bestseller, because we need that to keep the industry afloat. But
yeah,
it is interesting if you start like thinking about, okay, well, what makes the likes of Poe so enduring? And it
yeah,
also, I was thinking about something that you said during when I attended your masterclass earlier in the year, and you were talking about when Detransition had been optioned for TV and you're working on the screenplay for it, and how the suits kept pushing for Reese's desire for motherhood to become even clearer, right? And then as I'm reading it, like, to me, it already feels very clear. Like, as I'm reading this book, I'm like, it's very obvious that to her it's like, wow, this is my interpretation, but like she has literally said, like, what better way to basically solidify my identity as a woman and feel like a real true woman than to be a mother. And I'm curious to know, like, what about the existing storyline was not clear enough to them?
Well, I think, first of all, I love that you call them suits. I did not call them suits, I think, but that's fun to hear that lingo. The thing that's not clear is simply transphobia,
Mm.
and that the question is, why would a trans woman want to be a mother? And what they couldn't understand is, and that this is the way that transphobia actually intersects with just like sexism in general, is that they were like, well, and I'm paraphrasing like their thoughts. Their thoughts would be like, well, real women have biological clocks that make them want to be mothers. But
This is fucking false because I am
trans,
I don't
yeah,
have that.
but trans women don't have biological clocks. So why would Reese want to be a mother? There's no biological imperative for her to be a mother. And obviously, this is like extremely, essentializing, offensive, and all those sort of things. But like, and they would say, like, we know it's essentializing. We know that actually, that's like that, like not all women have a burning desire to be mothers and all these different things. But we are assuming, it was Amazon that was going to make this show. We are assuming that our readerships that our viewerships are all transphobic and all have essentializing views of gender. And we want you to like basically, anticipate those prejudices, those biases, like those worldviews, and make a very, very clear answer to those worldviews. And, so essentially I was, told to, um, basically convince people who couldn't believe that a trans woman wanted to be a mother for any reason that would come out of a trans woman's mouth. I had to somehow convince them by showing Reese as like a sort of saintly, motherly type, which is like, against Reese's character completely. But I think that like, in television, the people who are investing in these shows are very, very scared of not what the artist thinks, but what the audience's own biases are to overcome it. I'll give you a story about this, because again, we're not talking, when you talk about what do the suits want, like, we're not really talking art, we're talking commerce. I'm friends with some producers who did a show that was on network TV, on broadcast TV. It's sort of like the last gasp of like, Thursday night broadcast TV. And they had a show that was going to be one of the first primetime shows. It was with Katherine Heigl, and some, from Grey's Anatomy and some other people. And it was a legal show, and one of the characters was Laverne Cox. And the way that they do the initial ratings for a television show, when they're like, for advertisers, is they literally bring the show to Vegas, where they find people off the street in Vegas, and they're like, hey, you can get some drinks and you could come here if you watch this show and tell us what you think of these characters and moments. And these are like when people talk about like ratings for television shows, or like early ad stuff. And then in front of each viewer, they have a dial, and the dial says like, is the viewer, enjoying the show. And they kind of select the audience by like, various representatives of class and region of the country and race and whatever. But it's like, and you have a dial, and if like, a character walks in and you have a positive response to the dial, you put the dial up to like 10. And if a character says something that you think is not funny or dumb or something doesn't make sense, you put the dial down to 1. So that when you're watching this show, everybody gets a real-time readout of various audience segments' reactions to everything that's happening in the show. Now, Katherine Heigl came on the screen. People were like, "Oh, we love Katherine Heigl. She's so beautiful. Look at her. She's great on Grey's Anatomy. We like it." Then a joke happened. Dials go up. Whatever it is, people are liking the show. They're liking the show. Laverne Cox, who's a black trans woman, comes on the screen. Every single dial in every single demographic dives. Now, this is to sell to advertisers. So the advertisers are saying, we want a show that the audience says that they enjoy so we can sell our car or whatever the fuck it is. And we just saw that when Laverne Cox came on the screen, every dial dived. Now, they dived because they have it in real time and they can play the dials back against the playback. Like you could say, oh, those dials dived because her, they ask people afterwards. They're like, why did your dials dive when Laverne Cox came on? They're like, oh, we just didn't think she was a good character, or we didn't think, her plot line was very good. But you look at the dials and the plot, the graphs of that plotted against the playback, those dials dived before Laverne Cox ever opened her mouth. And so what is the conclusion? The conclusion is, for me, either racism or transphobia. Probably both. And so as somebody, so this happened 2 years before I'm writing my show, and so I'm not writing a show where people are like, write the best show with the characters who are the greatest that you can do. They're giving me a show where I have to combat transphobia, not in the first minute that these characters appear. We're talking, I have to combat transphobia in the first seconds that they appear, before they ever open their mouth. And, writing that show was about, it was writing against the weight of transphobia, really, and like, in some ways writing Detransition Baby was too, like, how do I make a funny, in some ways provocative, in some ways offensive book about, that has trans women that people will read. And so I, came up with all these sort of ways to, it's a weird book because I'm trying to find ways around these problems. And, for me, I thought I actually found some ways around these problems in my show, but that, Amazon then did Lord of the Rings, lost $1 billion, and like, it never got made. And I don't even think that had to do with my solutions. I think they cut like 95% of the shows that they had in development. So like, you asked that question in good faith, and partly you're repeating the things that I said in the masterclass, but it's like, you can't even answer those questions in good faith. You can't be like, why? If you're like, this is the book story, why don't people understand? It's like, that's not even a relevant question. It's not, they can understand, and their understanding, it does not surmount their prejudice. Or in the case of the executive, and that's not even true, because readers and viewers actually will surmount their prejudices, but it's not enough to surmount the fears of failure on the part of the people who have the money.
Yeah. I come from an advertising background as well.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And it is a real eye-opener. And knowing how risk-averse advertisers are, even no matter how they try, and particularly today, still in New Zealand, despite horrible shifts everywhere else in the world, many New Zealand companies are still trying to present themselves as being very open-minded and diverse, when they're not actually. It's mostly just green or rainbow washing. But even the most, I would say, progressive companies are still, I've worked with them. I know how scared they are. And they have little ways of speaking around the problem so that they don't have to directly hit it on the head, so that they can still tell themselves that they're a progressive company. But ultimately, they will choose not to work with a queer or trans influencer, or maybe not a certain person of color if they're worried that they're going to be too vocal about something else. I don't know the world of television, and especially here in New Zealand, our television industry is dead in the water. But that's a really interesting point. It's really, really and sad.
And I think but I think it's on one hand, it's like, that was a great intro to this talk that I did about strategic opacity, which I don't know if we're going to have time to totally explain. I'll just say that I did if you are interested in my ideas on strategic opacity, which is what I did for the masterclass in Auckland, I'll say this to you, I'm speaking now, not to you, but to the viewer who may be listening, there's a podcast that I did called Strategic Opacity by Tin House. If you want to just like listen to I've done it twice, so it's like kind of like a standard lecture that I do now. But it's basically the idea that like I don't think that you necessarily have to have characters who know what their motivations are. That Jen and I were in a Jen and I were in a room together as I did this. So I'm just gonna say that like that specific complaint was very tailored to that lecture, but that like to me this is I'm actually much more interested in talking about this idea that you and I are, this kind of become an informal thing and where I'm not sticking to the questions, but I'm talking about the stuff that is interesting to me, like now this week. I've done a bad job selling my books, for instance, but the talking so much about commerce and then totally neglecting to sell my own books. The interesting thing for me, I think, and the opportunity for an artist at this moment is not to say like, oh shit, there's transphobia, or like, even like, oh shit, there's like fascism. Maybe not in New Zealand, but like
there is
definitely.
Like, yeah. America sneezes, the world catches a cold.
Truly. Yeah. I'm sorry. Should have vaccinated for that. But to me, this is like my very problem as a writer is that like, I want to write, there's some part of me that's like, I want to write big novels of ideas. And I'm saying like, oh, here's a big novel of an idea. And I live in a country where you get the just yesterday, like the director of our health, basically saying like, oh, vaccines don't work, and the problem is that everybody should eat more steak. Like these are like so you're like, oh, I'm gonna write a book full of great speeches and ideas and all these and difficult literary approaches, when in order to combat the guy who can say that steak will cure your disease, and like it's like I'm not even in the same sport as these people. And not only that, they're fucking winning. Like that's the thing in this country is their steak stories are winning. And that's a challenge for me as an artist. It's a challenge for like everybody right now. Is that you can't even satirize Trump because whatever dumb shit you say, he's already said it dumber. He's already said it weirder. Like I had this joke in a book. So they opened up like essentially a concentration camp for immigrants in Florida, Alligator Alcatraz, which is the most humiliating thing, is to open a concentration camp and then give it a Disney name. And I was like, disgusting. So I was talking about Vermont. And I was like, oh, what's it going to be next? Green Mountain Gulag or something like that. And I said that as a joke, like that's so fucking far-fetched. I can't believe it. I found out Nebraska, whose state thing is people who husk corn, they are opening up one of these fucking immigrant concentration camps, and they're calling it the Cornhusker Clink. In Indiana, they're calling it, because they have the race in Indiana, they're calling it the Speedway Slammer.
That's disgusting. It's disgusting. Wrong with people?
It's disgusting.
Literally, what is wrong with people?
But this is the challenge as an artist, right? You want to make fun of, you can't satirize it because they're already 2 steps ahead of you, doing something dumber and more upsetting than anything that you can do as an artist. And you're gonna what? You're gonna write your little books and about like how fascism is bad? Like, no, they don't. They already know. They know. They like it. The videos that of people being pulled out of their cars and humiliated, those work as recruiting tools. People see those videos and they say, I want to do that. So people who are like filming ICE to basically be like, oh, we're going to film you, abusing this old woman. They're like, go ahead. That's going to fucking recruit more agents for us. So, sorry to go off on this, but I'm like, this is like obviously like a terrible political challenge, but it's also like, it's a devastating artistic one as a writer whose job it is to comment on this country. And all around me, I see people failing at it, failing, not living up to it. What can you possibly do? How can you say? And so what do? You write a cozy romantasy, because what else are you going to say? You're like, I'm going to marry some guy in the Elfin Kingdom. We're going to stay out of trouble. We're definitely not going to fight the dragons. We're going to open up a little store, and we're going to, we're going to stay away from the wars and just mind our own business and have a little successful spell shop, whatever it is. I get it. What else can you write in this moment? And so for me, so I've been thinking about this all summer. It's been depressing me. The thing to me, the answer is like, you don't, or like the thing that I'm thinking is actually like the very detritus. You're like, oh, I'm sorry, I work in advertising. Well, to me, that's the only thing that has any relevancy right now. It's the only thing is that like we're swamped in like stupid propaganda, and trying to like go above it is not going to do it. You actually have to like take the detritus of advertising, take the detritus of stupid fears about dials, about what if a trans woman comes on the screen, whatever it is, all those things. And instead of basically being like, I wish it wasn't that way, that's so stupid, we should change it. No, we lost at that right now. It's like, actually, how do you fucking like jujitsu that detritus? How do you make like sculptures out of trash? Because the only thing that people are relating to right now is like ridiculous trash. And it actually like there isn't enough time to do anything, to, write your, for a while I was like, maybe I do like Thomas Mann, and I just start writing Magic Mountain at the beginning of the war, and I finish it, 12 years after the war. And I say, I spent the First World War writing my great masterpiece, and everybody says, wonderful job. That's not, maybe somebody can do it, but it's not for me. And I just am like, I actually can't lament. There's no time to lament that, advertisers are cowards, or that politicians are idiots, or like, it's like what we have is trash. And like, I kind of think that like the role of the artist in this particular moment, at least in my country, is to make something out of trash. That's what's ahead.
I can't imagine trying to be creative. It's like you're kind of living in a bit of a war zone where you specifically are being fucking targeted every day. And how are you like, how is it possible to find space in your mind for creativity when you're literally under threat each day? And if being vigilant and afraid would be a very reasonable response.
I mean, the thing is, like, I'm mad about it. It's like, how am I getting like outsold by like whatever it is, like this one's actually kind of weirdly subversive, but I was watching like, The Hunting Wives or something like, like the MAGA lesbians or whatever it is, like whatever show is like, how am I getting like outmaneuvered? As like I think of myself as like a very subversive person. And I think it's like that, like, actually I have to throw away the terms that I've had my entire life, like even the things like the idea that I should be scared has to do with the fact that like I spent most of my life being safe or feeling safe, and I am scared. I am like upset. I am like, sort of baffled. And I've been depressed this summer because I've been standing around feeling like old and confused, like baffled at like the way that everything's happening, like being like, this is so stupid. Why is it happening? And I don't know, like in the last couple of weeks, I've kind of like regrouped and been like, I can see reasons why it's happening. I can see like, and that I'm baffled because I still think the old rules apply, and that someone's going to come and save me, or it's all going to go back to normal. And I think that like the kind of winded, tired inaction is like a result of like trying to write as though what's happening now is temporary, or that it's that somebody with sense is gonna come around and stop it. And once I kind of gave up on that idea, which I am kind of in the process of, different mornings, I'm like, no, it'll go back to normal. We'll go back to normal. And it's like, nah, no. I mean, that's why I was like reading novels about like the French Revolution and stuff, is like the idea that like you don't really go back. I mean, and that maybe even what the past was like the equivalent of like a ridiculous, income inequality or whatever it is, the champagne swilling king, and that actually like the person destroying destroying all the institutions right now is Trump. Like maybe he's the revolutionary, and he's a fascist revolutionary, but he's a revolutionary because he's the one who's willing to like burn it all down, in the way that leftists only like sloganize as doing. And then I'm like, well, if this is a revolution and nothing's ever going to go back, like, you get to do a lot more. If I want to write a story about an assassin, a political assassin, let's say, you know, 3 years ago that was fantasy. Now that's just shitty evening news, And that's whatever outlandish shit that has only been whatever outlandish shit has only been like for like bad Bond movies or like, what, dads watching historical shows about World War II and being a hero or whatever it is, fighting, the kind of like dumbass Tarantino stuff that has been just like, yeah, detritus. Suddenly that's our life now. And it's like, if I can like catch my breath, it's like it's like the most artistically urgent moment. And I have like the biggest palette I could ever hope for, if I'm just like willing to like stop like grieving.
Mm. Mm. That's a really interesting idea, I think, and one that actually makes a lot of sense to me.
I mean, this is why like I really think that like, I think that people are always reaching to the 20th century for analogies, but like, yeah, in the last couple of weeks I was reading a bit about the French Revolution, and it was like, just things like, well, we're just going to reverse the order. And so like, the word, like, whatever. I understand why everybody said aristocrats the word aristocrat was a bad idea, but it was like anything that was spoke to like aristocracy, they had to stamp it out, right? So like everybody's clothing changed and everybody's stuff, and it was so fast, and like, who was, and I understand that, but the sort of sweeping kind of like, we're going to get rid of this and we're going to get rid of that. Um, it like helped me somehow like understand the mind frame of these people who are sweeping away everything. And my thing is like, I don't want to be a French aristocrat looking at the devastation of the French Revolution in a baffled, nostalgic, backwards looking way. And I think that like so many, because things are getting worse, the temptation is to like stand there, kind of confused and be like, well, it was better in the past. Or like, why are you destroying all these things we built? It's like, I understand why everybody destroyed the things that, destroyed the French aristocracy during and I understand actually that like the situation in the United States and for a lot of people was untenable, and and that like people just want to, I mean, there's racism, there's fucked up all these other things, but like, it's like there's a Rousseau quote, and I'm not going to be able to quote the actual Rousseau, but it's basically like when the laws become too inflexible, you get a dictator who sweeps away the laws. And that to me is actually understandable, that like Americans drowning in debt, can't go to college, can't buy a house, working basically for all these other people, seeing billionaires get all stuff, and like, yeah, everything that everybody's doing is like against their own interests, but like people have been saying we want to burn it down, and it's like, and 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 you're like, well, the laws are too inflexible, the way of life is too inflexible, there's no opportunity, following Rousseau, you get a dictator. And like Rousseau was like, this is how you get Robespierre, cutting off everybody's head. The things were too inflexible with the French royalty, and so you get a dictator cutting off everyone's head, and a reign of terror. And I'm like, oh, we're in the reign of terror, and like, and I don't want back the king, but I do want to not just stand around confused in this time.
That's really interesting too, because one of my other special interests
Yeah.
which has been a special interest for a long time, actually has been the Cultural Revolution in China.
Very great, very great analogy.
And it's just like you said, like
Yeah.
Mao Zedong came into power because the wealth inequality and the gap between the wealthy and the educated and the peasants was so enormous, and he came through and he destroyed all this, and because of this, because the people wanted change so badly, the whole country got behind him and embraced this change and destroyed systems and broke everything down. And of course he became a very dangerous dictator and ended up millions and millions and millions of Chinese died because of his stupid choices. But you can see how they got there. Like, it's like it didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen in a vacuum. Like, people they needed this change. They wanted there to be more opportunity. And I'm reading a biography at the moment, and this woman, she's talking about when she's a young child, and she was one of the young Red Guards, which is a terrifying thought. But when she was recruited, she was reporting to one of her seniors who had formerly been completely broke, homeless, down on his luck because he had lost both parents. He had been sold to different owners, like sold into slavery. He'd had a terrible life. And because of Mao, now he had status and power and control. And he said to her, I owe everything to him, and there's nothing I could do that could possibly repay how much he's given me and done for me. And so, to your point, I was looking into Chinese history to get a better understanding of my ancestors, but looking at the parallels between how does a country slide into fascism, like how do you get into a dictatorship when it's against your own interests, like how does that happen? And then what's really fascinating is the artists who find ways of expressing themselves and telling stories and making poetry and hidden messages in these pieces of art so that they don't get thrown in jail is also incredible. Like, that's fascinating.
A lot of people say, I mean, I'm not like an expert on it or anything, but like a lot of people say that, like, Pushkin's like Eugene Onegin is like as metaphorically rich as it is because he had to get past the SARS censor. So he had to, like, make it full of metaphors and like, to me, I think just bring it back to like this moment, like as an American, I think there's like a real tradition of like, and I'm part of it, of writing about like individuals or things like identity, which are, ultimately there's a collective to it, but there's an individualistic kind of thing about identity and largely our, the American, the North American, certainly not Latin America is different, but the North American sort of tradition of the novel is not overtly political. There's something like a little like, vulgar about like, I remember the first time I read like not Grapes of Wrath, but one of the early Steinbecks when he was like into communism. And it was like, these guys calling each other comrade and being like, we want to do it for the people and this is a good idea. And I remember being like, oh, this is like embarrassing, this early Steinbeck. And now I'm like, oh, actually, like, we've like deprived ourselves of like the very weapons that we need as artists to like do this. And like, you know, and it's not necessarily to like rise above it in some sort of like enlightenment, humanities, kind of thing. Much as I am totally enamored with like, humanism, that's like what I think I was educated on. I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know if it's going to do it. And the question is like, yeah, for me as an artist right now, like, how do I rise to this? And how do I not be baffled? And like, how do I not be scared? And and it's not even that I'm not scared. It's just like, there's opportunity, um, to fight back somehow in art. And I don't know if I can't figure it out. I'm excited to at least read what other people do.
I love the idea of Trojan horsing into mega, like
Yeah.
writing under a pen name and writing some secretly queer bullshit, like something that like would, if they knew it was written by a queer person or a minority, that they would be outraged. I don't know. I love that idea of just making something out of trash, making art out of trash. I think that is just the perfect,
I mean,
I guess, state of play for the world right now.
this is a funny podcast because we've gone all over like, I really appreciate it, by the way. Like, just like, this is actually what I think like podcasts is like the I think so often when you're on a tour and you are doing this stuff, you end up kind of like, answering a lot of craft questions, answering a lot of, and like, that's great. I love a craft question, but like, um, you know, thanks for letting me talk about this because it's actually like what I want to hear like a lot from like other writers right now is like, I don't know, just I'm like spinning their wheels, being like actually not being like, oh, it's all gonna be fine or whatever, but to be like, yeah, it's falling apart. And and like, how do you actually be an artist in that? Some of it's logistical, like, do you have a job? Do you not have a job? But some of it's like, I mean, a book like Detransition Baby, right? Like, that's a book that sold the most copies. That's a world that's gone. I wrote a book about a world that's gone. The idea that like, that book was about like, what do trans women do, um, when they're like at the verge of acceptance, right? And, um, today, like yesterday, I mean, this is very American, but it was like the New York Times, I guess it was Washington Post reported that the DOJ, the Department of Justice in the United States, is going to try and ban guns for trans people. They
For
haven't
fuck's
done it,
sake.
but basically they've not been able to have any, they haven't gotten a single gun ban in the United States, famously. And they're like, well, we're going to ban them for trans women or trans people, I think in general, but they're like saying that one of the school shooters recently was trans, and so they're going to do this thing.
Well, according to the DOJ, trans people don't
Eh,
exist. So shouldn't it
Yeah,
just be a gun
and
ban?
yeah, it's true. That's but like the thing is like it's all like this is the thing is like it's not it's stupid. It's all just stupid. It's you can't have
It's so
logic.
stupid. It's
It's
so
all just stupid.
stupid.
And gotta be opportunity in that. It's just and then like like basically being like it is bad. That's my particular thing. And like it's worse if you're an immigrant. It's worse if you're living in a city with a that's not New York, with like a black mayor. I grew up in Chicago and they're talking about like invading Chicago. Yeah, there's something artistically, and I really think, I don't want to read like think pieces. Like I almost just want to hear people, yeah, just talking it out, being like, what did you do? What did you do? What do you think? What's your approach? And maybe people are just tired and maybe people are tired and scared, so they don't have an approach. But like to me, that's like figuring out my approach is like the major artistic project uh of this moment for me. What's my approach to everything I think? I mean, maybe people disagree and they're like, this is hyperbole, or you're, chicken little or something. But I think that everything's different. I think we're French revolutioning it, and that like writing into a new era is like that. We're writing into the revolution.
I've had a lot of conversations like this on the podcast with different writers because you can't really ignore like you it feels very disingenuous to talk about books, which are to me inherently it's writing and reading is political, whether or not
Yeah.
we are writing about something political or not, and it feels disingenuous to ignore the context of the world in which we are consuming
Well,
media right now.
what are people's best ideas that you like? What stuck with you?
Well, I had a really long conversation with Sarah Rose Etta on
Mm-hmm.
the same things. Also, everybody is sort of struggling because in a lot of the people I've spoken to have speculative elements in their books, and they're like, "There's nothing I can write that hasn't already happened." Like, or I'll
Yeah.
write it, like maybe I'll write it and like come up with it, but by the time the book goes to print, it will have fucking happened. So like nothing is like original or new or like creative. Like it's
Right.
just survival a little bit.
This is what I kind of think is also, but this is where, I mean, there's like a weird opportunity, right? Like, if you can't write speculative because it's all going to happen fast, right? Then what's left is like realism.
Mm.
And like, you can do allegories, you can do all these, different things. But like, I've actually had this like suspicion that like realism is the like mode, is one of like is a mode to take on now, because like previously realism was like, I went to the sink, I had a glass of water, I argued with somebody and then I slept or whatever it is. But now it's like realism is like more exciting than any Hollywood movie, is more absurd, is more filled with like betrayal and avarice. Yeah, it's like I don't need to watch Succession. Like I can just read the news. Well, I guess Succession is
Literally.
kind of Succession's somewhat realist, but I don't know. I don't need to see an
Black
allegory
Mirror.
for it. Yeah, Black Mirror.
Black
There you
Mirror.
go.
Tell you, they
Yeah.
must be having it. Imagine trying to be a Black Mirror writer at the moment.
Yeah.
I feel like you'd be out of a job. Like, what could
Yeah.
you possibly come up with that would be? I stopped watching it because I'm like,
Yeah. Like, yeah,
I
this is
don't want to be
tame.
depressed.
Yeah.
It's just real life.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah. And so like, I don't know. This is a really, actually, could be a really interesting era artistically. I won't say it's happy, it's fucked, but it's like maybe people. I kind of thought the millennials have been like a little bit of a, and I say again as a millennial, I kind of felt like we were maybe a dud generation.
Oh, we are. I feel like we
Yeah,
are. We got
and
fucked.
like I think about like the Russian generation, like in between like Pushkin and like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, where you're like a Turgenev, and people are like, oh, Turgenev, he's all right. He did a few things, but no one's going to like Turgenev for like and I've always thought we're like the Turgenev of Turgenev generation. Something crazy is going to happen next, and things are crazy in the past. And what would you have, like Facebook or something? But maybe we're not Turgenevs. Maybe we're actually, we're writing before the clouds. We're the Voltaires.
I'm ready for millennials to come into power, please.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so ready for the boomers to step down and die and for the millennials to come into power.
Yeah.
If we do it all, I feel like we're so exhausted as a generation. So maybe everyone will just decide that pass the baton straight to Gen Z.
Yeah. Well, they've got some ideas. Good for them.
I mean, please, anything has got to be a material improvement. Okay, well, just a couple of questions for us to end.
Sure.
Are you working on anything at the moment? Like, what does your writing process look like at this time? Like, of figuring things out?
I'm mostly collecting myself, like, It's gonna sound weird, but like I'm like in terms of um like writing things out of trash. I came up with a plot and then I was like, wait a second, for like a book. I was like, wait a second, I think this plot is the same as every single Scooby-Doo episode. Like, and then I was like, in any other era, I've been like, oh, my plot is the same as Scooby-Doo. Like, maybe that's a bad sign, And now I'm like, no, this is the trash to art era. And so like, basically like, what if I like did, it's not Scooby-Doo, but like, what if I did a Scooby-Doo plot and just like went hard on it, and was like, and was like acknowledging like, yeah, this is a fucking Scooby-Doo plot. Like, how could you expect anything but a Scooby-Doo plot in this era? Like I'm not, it doesn't make sense to do like a brilliant treatise on whatever when you're talking to like morons who lie to you. You weaponize Scooby-Doo. That's how you do it. I don't know if that's true or not, but this is my working theory. So I'm basically writing a Scooby-Doo book.
That's amazing.
To try and actually figure out what to say. So that's my project.
I would read the shit out of that. I'm not even gonna lie. I think you would do it. It would be so funny. Like, so genuinely funny. I hope you do finish it. Yeah. Finish that. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much. It's been so good to talk to you and just to be honest about life in the universe. And I know you keep saying, I'm not doing a good job of selling my books. Like, trust me when I say that anyone who listens to this podcast is not really, we're already fans, and we come here because we want to hear, we want to hear real talk. And I don't mean real talk as in like, I don't know, whatever it is, but like you being honest about what's happening for you is really validating for a lot of people, because we're all feeling shit. We're all struggling, and it's like, let's just, I don't know, struggle together or feel like a little bit less alone, knowing that people are also going through this. Because I also know a lot of people who listen are writers as well, who maybe they're published, maybe they're not, maybe they want to be, and hearing the realities of like what the world of craft is like is actually very, very validating and inspiring in different ways. So thank you very, very much for being so candid and vulnerable with us.
No, we're happy to do it. Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to Sick Sad Lit. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really loved it, leaving a quick review helps other readers and writers find the show. And if you want to keep the conversation going, come hang out with us in the Sick Sad Friends Discord book club. Come for the books, stay for the friends. You'll find the link in the show notes below. Until next time, thanks for listening.